Think about it. Have you ever been in a situation where forgiveness and closure were the hardest things to give? What would you do if someone who betrayed you came back, asking for forgiveness? Would you give them a second chance, or would you walk away for good? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and stay with me till the end. You won't want to miss the powerful journey of moving on. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more emotional stories like this. The grand church buzzed with soft whispers as guests settled into their seats. The stained glass windows bathed the room in a warm, almost ethereal glow. Ethan stood at the altar, trying to steady his nerves. His hands gripped the edges of his suit jacket, though his palms were slick with sweat. Everything was supposed to be perfect. This was it, the moment he'd been waiting for, the moment he'd promised Sarah. But now, standing there, with the weight of 100 eyes on him, something had shifted inside him. His heart raced, his breath shallow, as he watched Sarah make her way down the aisle. She looked radiant, the dress flowing around her as if she were floating. Her eyes were locked on him, full of love and trust, and for a fleeting second, he felt the pressure of what he was about to do. He should have been thrilled. He should have been excited to spend the rest of his life with the woman he loved. But the truth was, as Sarah came closer, all he could feel was an overwhelming wave of doubt. Her father, with a gentle hand on her arm, guided her down the aisle, and with each step she took, Ethan's chest tightened. The vision he had once shared with her, the future they had planned together, felt distant now, impossible even. His own eyes, once full of affection for her, now seemed clouded with uncertainty. He could barely hear the priest as he spoke, his voice muffled by the roar of Ethan's own heartbeat. "Do you, Ethan, take Sarah to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The words felt heavy, as though they carried the weight of an entire life that wasn't his anymore. His throat closed up, and for a moment, the room seemed to spin. This was the moment he should have been smiling, full of joy. But instead, all he could hear was the ringing in his ears. Ethan's mouth went dry. His palms were clammy. He looked down at Sarah, her wide eyes filled with nothing but love and hope, and the weight of what he was about to do hit him like a freight train. He couldn't marry her. Not today, not like this. Not when everything felt wrong. "I can't do this, Sarah. I'm sorry." The words fell from his lips without warning, and the room seemed to go dead silent. Sarah's smile faltered as the shock of what he had said hit her. Her eyes searched his face, her lips parting as though she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "What?" she whispered, as though trying to make sense of his words. Ethan couldn't speak. He just stepped back, taking a few steps away from her, away from their future. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the sound of her sharp intake of breath. Sarah stood frozen, her hand still gripping the bouquet, but now, the trembling fingers couldn't hide the pain that was flooding her heart. Her father, standing beside her, looked as though the earth had been ripped from beneath him. The shock spread through the crowd like wildfire, the hushed whispers and stares almost unbearable to bear. But none of it mattered to Ethan. He turned, slowly, without looking back. He was walking away. And Sarah, left standing at the altar, felt everything she thought she knew about love collapse in on itself. The humiliation hit her like a punch to the gut. The world felt like it was spinning in slow motion. The guests, her family, her friends, all eyes were on her as she stood there alone. Her heart shattered, piece by piece, with every second that passed. As Ethan made his way toward the exit, Sarah stood still, her heart breaking in the silence of the church. He didn't look back. He didn't offer an apology. He simply left. And in that moment, the life she had dreamed of with him crumbled, leaving her standing in a sea of stunned faces, completely broken. The years that followed the wedding disaster were a whirlwind of both triumph and struggle. In the early months after Ethan's departure, Sarah often found herself waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, her heart racing as if the betrayal were still happening. The memories of that day, standing alone at the altar, the crushing weight of humiliation, stayed with her. But she was determined to rise above it. She refused to let the image of Ethan, or the embarrassment he had caused her, define the rest of her life. Instead of drowning in despair, Sarah channeled every ounce of her pain into something productive. She buried herself in her studies, focusing on law with a singular intensity that bordered on obsession. Her nights were spent with legal textbooks, and her days were spent in law offices, fighting for the underdog, earning the respect of her peers. She was determined to prove to herself, and to everyone else, that she was not the fragile woman Ethan had left behind. She was more than that. She would show them all. And show them, she did. Over the years, Sarah's reputation as a family court lawyer blossomed. Her unwavering commitment to fairness and justice earned her accolades and promotions. She became known for her no-nonsense approach, always pushing for what was right, even when it wasn't the most popular decision. In a world where emotions often clouded the truth, Sarah remained unshaken, her integrity never wavered. The climb to the top, however, was far from easy. With every case she won, every professional milestone she reached, the whispers about her past grew louder. The story of the woman left at the altar had followed her, like a shadow that would never quite go away. People knew her for her success, but they also whispered about her heartbreak. They wondered if she had truly healed. But in the courtroom, she was untouchable. Sarah ruled with authority. She made decisions with confidence, and her calm demeanor set her apart from others who often allowed their emotions to cloud their judgment. She could look at the families in front of her, broken and pleading, and speak with a coolness that was rare and admired. To everyone who saw her, she was a symbol of strength and resilience. Still, at night, when the cases were over and the courtroom emptied, Sarah would sit in the silence of her office, the weight of her success sinking in. She had achieved everything she had ever wanted, but there was always a part of her that felt empty, like a void that could never be filled. The thought of Ethan lingered in the quiet hours. What had happened to him? Was he still the man she had once loved, or had he become someone else entirely? She never allowed herself to think about it during the day, there was simply no time. But in the stillness of the night, those unanswered questions haunted her. What made him walk away that day? Had she done something wrong? Was she not enough? Those doubts, no matter how much she tried to bury them, were always there, simmering beneath the surface. At times, she convinced herself that she was fine. That she had moved on. That her life was finally in order. She had everything she had worked for. But there was always that small part of her, the one that kept those unanswered questions locked away, that wondered if Ethan's sudden disappearance had been more than just a momentary lapse in judgment. Had he known something she didn't? Had he been running from something? Or was he simply too afraid to love her the way she had loved him? It was a question she would never have answers to. And that was the hardest part. She couldn't even say goodbye to the man who had once been her everything, because he had just disappeared. No closure. No explanation. Just an empty space in her life where he once stood. And so, she buried it all. She buried the pain, the confusion, the what-ifs. The world saw the accomplished woman, the judge who stood tall and strong. But deep down, Sarah knew the truth. There would always be a piece of her, hidden in the darkest corners of her mind, that would never truly move on from Ethan. Years had passed, and Sarah had built a reputation that not only earned her respect but also gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't known before. Family court, once a place where she had struggled to make her voice heard, had become her kingdom. She was the judge everyone turned to for fairness and clarity, and in a world full of chaos, she found a strange peace in knowing she had the power to make a difference. Yet, no matter how high she had risen, how much she had achieved, she could never completely shake the ghost of Ethan. And then came the call. It was a Wednesday morning when Sarah's assistant placed the file in front of her. The papers were crisp, the case marked with the word urgent in bold red letters. She barely looked at the name at first, too busy with a stack of other cases. But as she flipped the file open, her eyes froze on the first page, Ethan Pierce. The world seemed to tilt for a moment. She had not heard his name in years, not in any capacity that mattered, anyway. But there it was, the name that had haunted her dreams for so long, now staring up at her from a stack of paperwork. Her breath caught in her throat, and her pulse quickened. Ethan. The man who had once promised her forever, only to walk away without an explanation. The man who had shattered her heart and left her to pick up the pieces in the wreckage of their relationship. The case details hit her like a punch to the gut. Ethan was embroiled in a high-profile divorce with his wife, Claire, a woman from a powerful family. Their marriage had been a spectacle, lavish, public, and admired by many. But the cracks had begun to show, and now Claire was accusing Ethan of deceit, infidelity, and betrayal. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. Ethan, the man who had broken her heart, was now standing on the other side of the courtroom, facing the very accusations he had once denied when it came to their own relationship. He had deceived her once before, and now, it seemed, the tables had turned. It was too much to process in the moment. Sarah's mind raced as she reread the details of the case. Claire's accusations were serious, and the stakes were high. As a judge, Sarah was bound by duty, by a professional code she had followed meticulously for years. But as she closed the file and looked at the ceiling, she realized something that shook her to the core. This wasn't just another case. This was personal. Her heart was already thudding in her chest, and she could feel the old emotions bubbling to the surface: anger, hurt, confusion. Ethan had walked away from her on their wedding day without a single word of explanation. He had shattered her world, leaving her to question everything about herself, their love, and the life she had imagined. And now here she was, about to preside over his downfall. The temptation to delve into the past, to finally get answers, was almost too much to resist. But she had worked too hard to build the life she had now. She had rebuilt herself, and it wasn't for the sake of reliving that painful chapter. She wasn't the naive woman who had stood at the altar all those years ago. She was stronger, more independent, and professional. But still, her mind couldn't help but wander. What had happened to Ethan? Was he still the man she had once loved, or had time changed him into someone unrecognizable? Sarah found herself replaying old memories of their time together, the moments of tenderness, the promises made, the love they had once shared so freely. She quickly shoved those thoughts away. This was a courtroom, not a time for reminiscing. She was here to be a judge, not a jilted ex-fiancé. But the more she examined the case, the harder it was to suppress the feelings that rushed to the surface. Every document she read, every conversation she had with her staff, made her think of him. The way his smile used to melt her heart. The way he had held her close on their last night together, promising her that nothing would ever change. The way his eyes had looked at her that fateful day at the altar, their last look before he turned away, leaving her heartbroken and confused. Her mind wandered to their final moments together. What happened, Ethan? Why didn't you fight for us? She wanted to know. She needed to understand. But as much as she longed for answers, she knew that this case wasn't about finding closure for herself, it was about the truth. And truth, she had learned, had a way of coming out whether you were ready for it or not. And so, Sarah resolved to do what she had always done, put aside the personal, and focus on the professional. She would be impartial, fair, and just. She wouldn't let the man who had once destroyed her affect her judgment now. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that the trial wasn't going to be as simple as she hoped. Ethan was no longer the man she remembered. He had changed. But how much? And was he the same man who had once vowed to be hers forever? The weight of the past was heavy on Sarah's shoulders, and as the trial loomed closer, she couldn't help but wonder, would this be her chance to confront him? To find out what really happened all those years ago, or would she simply be a judge, sitting in the courtroom, listening to his lies? The court date was set. The wheels were in motion, and nothing could prepare Sarah for the storm that was about to hit. The trial began, and Sarah sat at the bench, determined to remain the impartial judge she was known to be. But every time her eyes briefly flicked toward Ethan, it was impossible to shake the flood of memories that came crashing back. His confident smile, the kind that once made her feel safe and cherished, was now replaced by a cold, distant expression. The man who had once vowed to spend a lifetime with her had turned into a stranger. But beneath his sharp suit and stiff demeanor, Sarah couldn't help but sense a hint of vulnerability, buried deep within. As the trial unfolded, Claire's lawyer, an aggressive, seasoned litigator, presented evidence that no one could have anticipated. It started with a simple mention of Ethan's past, something that caught Sarah's attention but didn't yet feel like more than background noise. However, when the lawyer dropped the bombshell, Sarah felt the air around her grow heavy, suffocating almost. Ethan, it turned out, had been married before he even met Claire. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as the lawyer's words sank in. His first wife, a woman who had vanished from the public eye years ago, had been Claire's younger sister. The marriage had ended tragically, with her untimely death in a car accident. The details were raw and painful. The courtroom was silent as Sarah listened, her stomach twisting with unease. But that wasn't the most shocking revelation. No, the real bombshell came next, and it was so unexpected that Sarah could barely breathe. The lawyer revealed that Ethan had a son, a boy named Noah. The courtroom gasped collectively, and Sarah's heart dropped to the pit of her stomach. Ethan, the man she had once trusted, who had looked at her with so much love and affection, had a child he had abandoned years ago. The files revealed that Noah had been placed in foster care after Ethan's first marriage ended, and Ethan had never once sought him out. There was no explanation, no justification, only the stark, cruel reality that Ethan had ignored his son, his flesh and blood, for years. Sarah's hands trembled as she tried to process the information. Her mind screamed in disbelief. This couldn't be the man she had known, the man she had once called hers. As the revelation settled in, the courtroom descended into chaos. Claire's lawyer was relentless, painting Ethan as a man who had been deceiving not just his wife but the world around him. But for Sarah, it was personal. This wasn't just about Claire's accusations of infidelity and betrayal, it was about the boy Ethan had abandoned. The boy who had been forgotten, left to grow up in a system that failed to offer him the love and protection he deserved. Ethan sat in the defendant's chair, his face a mask of stoic indifference, but Sarah could see it in his eyes, the flicker of guilt, the shadow of a man who was hiding the deepest parts of himself. And just like that, the case was no longer just a divorce. It was a story of neglect, of betrayal, and of the father who had walked away from everything. Sarah found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about Ethan. The man she had once adored, the man she had believed in, was not the person she had imagined. She had trusted him, and now, in this courtroom, the truth was unraveling in front of her, piece by piece. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest as the magnitude of Ethan's actions began to sink in. The trial had taken a dark turn, and for Sarah, it felt like the ghosts of her past were rising from the shadows, forcing her to confront not just Ethan's betrayal, but the painful truth of everything he had left behind. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. The case had turned into more than just a legal matter, it had become personal, slicing through every layer of her professionalism. Ethan's betrayal was one thing, but the truth about Noah, the son he'd abandoned, had torn open wounds she had long buried. A child, left in the system while Ethan moved on with his life. The thought gnawed at her. How could a father turn his back on his own blood? She tried to block it out, focusing on her duties as a judge, but Noah's face haunted her thoughts. Who was he? What had his life been like without his father? And why, after everything, had Ethan not fought for him? These questions twisted in Sarah's mind until she could no longer ignore them. The more she thought about Noah, the deeper the knot of guilt in her stomach grew. She couldn't stand by and pretend nothing was wrong. Late one evening, after the courthouse had emptied, Sarah sat at her desk, staring at the case file. The harsh fluorescent lights above seemed to close in on her as she read through Ethan's lies once more. She had seen the accusations, the betrayals, but there was a piece missing. The thing Ethan had hidden, the truth that could unravel everything. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. She grabbed it, hands shaking slightly, as she dialed a number she knew she shouldn't. Social services, can you provide me with any information about a child named Noah, born to Ethan Hale? There was a long pause on the other end, then a reluctant voice replied, I can't give you details, but I'll tell you this, Noah was put into foster care after Ethan's divorce. He barely saw his father after that, and once Ethan remarried, Noah became a ghost in his life. The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. A ghost. The child, just a small boy, was left behind, his future uncertain, while Ethan moved on with his new life. Her pulse raced. She asked more questions, but the answers only deepened her disgust. Ethan had been given a second chance, he had been allowed to build a new life with Claire. But what about Noah? What had he been given? Sarah's heart twisted as she thought of the boy, just a name on a file, forgotten by the very man who should have cared for him. What right did Ethan have to be happy, to rebuild his life, when his son was living without him? But then, another question arose. Should she expose the truth? The words expose the truth echoed in her mind like a ticking time bomb. If she revealed Ethan's secret, it could destroy everything. His marriage to Claire, his wealth, his life, gone in an instant. Was it worth it? Some truths are meant to be buried, she whispered to herself, wrestling with her own conscience. But as she thought of Noah, the boy who had suffered because of Ethan's selfishness, Sarah couldn't silence the voice inside her that said, this secret has to come out. Would she destroy Ethan's life? Or would she protect the family he had built, even if it meant leaving Noah in the shadows? The tension in Sarah's chest grew with every passing second. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, suffocating her. The truth had a way of coming to light, she knew. But once it did, there would be no going back. And so, with the decision hanging in the air like a storm cloud, Sarah whispered, I can't let this go. Not this time. The final day of the trial was upon them, and the weight of the moment was undeniable. Sarah, ever the professional, tried to mask her growing unease. The courtroom was electric with anticipation, the air thick with the sound of nervous whispers and the shuffle of papers. As the attorneys wrapped up their closing arguments, Sarah sat at the bench, her gaze steady, her fingers clenched tightly around the gavel. She had been here countless times before, but today felt different. Today, it wasn't just about the law, it was personal. Ethan, sitting across from her, appeared unshaken, but Sarah knew better. His eyes flickered nervously as he shifted in his seat, a subtle sign that even he couldn't escape the mounting pressure. Claire, on the other hand, sat with quiet determination, her gaze never leaving Ethan, as though she had something more to say. And then it happened. Just as Sarah was about to call for a recess, Claire stood up, her voice cutting through the murmur of the room. Your Honor, there's something you need to know. Sarah's stomach tightened. It wasn't unusual for new evidence to come to light in high-profile cases, but something in Claire's tone suggested this would be different. The entire room fell silent, every eye trained on her as she pulled a stack of papers from her briefcase and handed them over to Sarah. What is this? Sarah asked, keeping her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. Proof, Claire said, her words dripping with vindication. Proof that Ethan Hale's first marriage wasn't just a footnote in his past, it was the beginning of a series of lies that he spent years burying. Claire flipped through the pages, revealing photographs, legal documents, and correspondence. As Sarah glanced through them, her pulse quickened. Among the papers, there was an annulment decree, the details of a tragic and unexplained event that had followed, and, most shocking of all, proof of Ethan's son, Noah. Claire presented the birth certificate, accompanied by a DNA test confirming Ethan's paternity. The courtroom erupted in a wave of gasps, whispers, and murmurs. The truth had been exposed, and there was no going back. Ethan's face turned ghostly pale, his once composed demeanor crumbling in front of everyone. He had been so careful to hide his past, so meticulous in keeping the truth from surfacing. But now, with the undeniable evidence staring him in the face, the cracks in his life were widening. This was the moment when everything unraveled. Your Honor, Claire's attorney continued, voice cutting through the chaos, Ethan Hale has lied, not only to his wife, but to everyone in this room. His son, Noah, was abandoned, left to grow up in foster care while Ethan built a new life with his second wife. How could a man who abandoned his own son be trusted to stand as the pillar of his family now? Ethan shot to his feet, his face contorted in shock and disbelief. This isn't true, he stammered, his voice shaking. I've paid my dues, this is in the past. You have no right. But Sarah raised a hand, silencing him. The chaos in the room had reached its peak, and she needed to regain control. As the murmurs turned to shouts, the weight of the moment hit her like a tidal wave. The man who had once stood at an altar, promising to spend forever with her, was no longer the person she thought she knew. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence as Sarah stood, her voice calm but firm. Enough. This is no longer about a divorce. This is about the truth. And the truth has a way of coming to light, no matter how far you try to bury it. Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of the revelations. As she glanced at Ethan, she could see the facade cracking, his carefully constructed life now exposed for all to see. The truth had been unleashed, and there was no escaping it. The courtroom was silent as Sarah's hand hovered over the gavel. The weight of the moment settled heavily on her chest. She had done everything she could to remain impartial, to separate her emotions from the law. But now, as the evidence laid bare the full extent of Ethan's deceit, there was no escaping it. She could feel the eyes of the room on her, waiting for her decision, each one a reminder of the turmoil that had brought her here. Ethan sat at the defendant's table, his face drained of color, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He had been a man of confidence once, an image she had once adored, but now, he looked nothing like the person she had once known. The man who had walked away from her all those years ago, the man who had betrayed her trust, was now a stranger in her eyes. And yet, despite the years and the pain, part of Sarah still felt a pang of sympathy. She shook her head. No, this is not about him anymore. This is about justice. The trial had become more than just a divorce case. It had unearthed secrets that Ethan had buried deep, secrets that, once revealed, could never be erased. His abandonment of his son, Noah, the lies about his past, it had all come crashing down on him. And Sarah could see the man he was now, stripped of his pretensions, exposed for who he truly was. The courtroom was still. Her voice cut through the silence, steady and unwavering. After reviewing the evidence, considering the testimonies, and weighing the moral implications of this case, it is my ruling that the petition for divorce is granted. Ethan Hale's actions have left irreparable damage in their wake, not only to his wife, Claire, but to his own flesh and blood. The abandonment of his son, Noah, and the deceit he has carried for years cannot go unacknowledged. She paused, glancing at Ethan. His eyes met hers for a moment, but she saw no remorse, only the cold, calculating look of a man who had been caught. She felt a flicker of disgust, but she pushed it away. This is justice. Nothing more. Furthermore, Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength, I will ensure that custody of Noah is reassessed, and that his future is secured. The damage done to him will not be overlooked. This is not just about a broken marriage, it's about the life of a child who was left behind. Ethan's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He simply sat there, defeated, his world crumbling around him. Sarah could see the man's pride had shattered. The man who once believed he was untouchable was now facing the consequences of his own actions. But even as Sarah delivered the verdict, she couldn't help but feel hollow. There was no satisfaction in watching Ethan fall from grace. In some ways, it felt like an empty victory. She had long ago moved on, but the echoes of the past still lingered, casting shadows on her present. This is the price of betrayal, she thought. This is what it costs to lose someone who was once everything to you. As Sarah brought the gavel down, sealing the verdict, she felt no triumph. Just a quiet, steady acceptance of what had to be done. It was over. The case, the hurt, the past, it was all behind her now. Or at least, it had to be. In that moment, as she looked around the courtroom, a single thought crossed her mind: closure doesn't always come with satisfaction. Sometimes, it's just the quiet of knowing you've done what's right. The weeks following the trial were a blur of activity for Sarah. She had thrown herself back into her work, immersing herself in case files and courtroom dramas. The days passed quickly as she moved from one case to the next, her mind focused, her drive unwavering. The courtroom, once a place of painful memories and emotional turmoil, had become her sanctuary, a place where she could control the narrative, where the past no longer had the power to dictate her actions. But even as she threw herself into her work, Sarah knew the wounds from her past weren't completely healed. They were still there, lingering beneath the surface, waiting to resurface when she least expected it. There were moments, rare, fleeting moments, when she would catch herself thinking about Ethan. The flash of his face in the courtroom, the weight of his absence in her life. But those thoughts no longer held the power they once did. They were just fragments of a story that had ended, a story she had long since walked away from. Sarah had grown, transformed, in ways she hadn't even realized until now. The woman who had once stood at the altar, hoping for a future with Ethan, had become someone else. Someone stronger. Someone who no longer relied on anyone else to validate her worth. She'd stopped asking herself questions about the past. What if things had been different? What if he had stayed? Those questions had no place in her life anymore. She no longer wondered what could have been because she had found something more powerful, the ability to choose her own future. The pain she once carried had turned into a quiet resolve. She had worked hard to build her career, to earn her place in the legal world, and she wasn't about to let the ghosts of her past cloud her achievements. Every decision she made now was for herself. Every victory, no matter how small, was a step toward the life she was creating. As Sarah walked into the courthouse one morning, ready to face the day's challenges, a quiet thought echoed in her mind: the past doesn't define me anymore. The words weren't just a mantra, they were the truth she had embraced. The future was hers to shape, and she was no longer waiting for permission to live it. And so, as the gavel fell in the courtroom that day, Sarah stood taller than she ever had before. She was no longer a woman haunted by the past. She was a woman moving forward, carving out a new path, one step at a time. It was a quiet afternoon when the letter arrived. Sarah sat at her desk, reviewing case files, when her assistant handed it to her, the envelope marked with Claire's name. The handwriting was elegant, but it carried an air of uncertainty. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. After everything that had happened, Claire's name still carried weight in her life, stirring memories of the courtroom drama and the painful revelations that had unfolded in the months prior. For a moment, Sarah hesitated. The past had been a heavy burden, and she wasn't sure she was ready to revisit it. But curiosity won out. She tore open the envelope, unfolding the letter with careful hands. The words were soft, almost hopeful, as Claire spoke of Noah. She wrote about the boy's journey through foster care, the difficulties he had faced, and the absence of his father. But in a surprising turn, Claire revealed that she had managed to locate Noah and had been helping him reconnect with Ethan. The letter overflowed with gratitude, Claire expressing her appreciation for Sarah's role in the case and the support she had shown in uncovering the truth. Sarah read the letter twice, absorbing each word. She had always feared the worst for Noah. The idea of a child abandoned by his own father, growing up without love or stability, had haunted her. But now, with Claire's help, Noah was getting a chance, a real chance, to rebuild his relationship with Ethan. The relief was almost overwhelming. Sarah had no idea what kind of man Noah had become or how his reunion with Ethan would unfold, but there was hope in Claire's words, a glimmer of a future that wasn't defined by pain or abandonment. The boy who had once been forgotten was now stepping into a world where love and family could be found again. As Sarah sat back in her chair, she felt something stir deep within her, an unexpected peace. The weight of her past with Ethan was finally beginning to lift. The questions, the hurt, the confusion, all of it was fading into the background. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt that perhaps, just perhaps, some wounds could heal. Noah had a chance at a better life, and that knowledge settled in her heart like a balm. She folded the letter and placed it in her desk drawer, allowing herself a quiet moment of closure. There was no more bitterness, no more questions. The past was now just that, asterisk the past, asterisk. The future, Sarah knew, was waiting. And for the first time in a long while, she was ready to embrace it. The rain pattered softly against the windows of Sarah's office as the late afternoon light dimmed. She had just finished her final case of the day when the soft click of the door opening caught her attention. Ethan stood in the doorway, soaked from the storm, his face drawn and weary. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with unspoken words and memories that neither could erase. Ethan stepped into the room slowly, as if testing the waters, unsure of his welcome. His usual confident demeanor was replaced with something unfamiliar, vulnerability. His eyes, once so full of certainty, now reflected a deep regret. "Sarah," he started, his voice raw, like it had been a long time since he had spoken the words he was about to say. She looked at him, her heart strangely calm, the years of hurt and disappointment now distant echoes. She nodded, gesturing to the chair across from her. "What is it, Ethan?" she asked, her voice even, betraying no emotion. It was a question she had long ago stopped asking herself, but now, the words felt necessary. Ethan hesitated before sitting down. He looked at her, the weight of their shared history settling between them. "I've made so many mistakes," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I was selfish, and I hurt you in ways I'll never be able to undo. I regret everything, Sarah. Every moment we lost, every promise I broke. I've changed. I've seen what my choices have done, and I'll never be able to forgive myself for abandoning you and Noah." Sarah's eyes softened, but she didn't respond immediately. She simply let him speak, his words a testament to the years of guilt he had carried. She listened, but the anger that once bubbled up at the sound of his voice was gone. There was no fire left, no sharpness in her soul to match his regret. Instead, there was a quiet, steady calm that filled her chest. When he finished, there was a long silence. The room felt heavy, not with bitterness, but with finality. Sarah sat back in her chair, her hands folded neatly on her desk. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, saw him clearly, not as the man who had once held her heart, but as the man who had caused her so much pain. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice steady. "Thank you for saying that. But you need to understand something. I've moved on. I've learned to let go of the past. And as much as you've changed, the person you once were, well, she's not here anymore. I'm not the same woman who loved you, and I don't need you in my life." Ethan's face fell, the weight of her words hitting him harder than any blow. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words caught in his throat. There was nothing left to say. As he stood to leave, Sarah stayed seated, watching as he walked out the door. The rain outside had stopped, and in the quiet stillness of the room, she felt something shift within her. The closure she had long sought had arrived, not in anger, but in peace. She was free. And for the first time in years, Sarah felt stronger than she had ever been. The past was truly over. She had embraced her future, and nothing, no one, could take that from her. This is where the journey ends. Thank you for watching. Until next time, take care and see you soon.